Hey investors. So today I just wanted to talk about some things that you want to avoid as a new real estate investor, right? And I'm going to give you a story. And this is a cautionary tale of some things that you just want to avoid. And I'll also get into a little more detail about some things you can do. And I'll discuss that a little bit later. But as a new real estate investor, I can't stress it enough is that you want to make sure you're educated and do your due diligence when it pertains to your properties or obtaining a property, all of that good stuff. You want to make sure you have that in order. Now, I'm not saying that you should get analysis paralysis, right? Because you can research yourself to death and not end up making a move. At some point, you have to make a move. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is a story that I was just told about a young lady who was renting an apartment from, renting a home from another person. So the landlord didn't have a lease in place. And this is what the young lady was telling me, that she has not had a lease since she's lived in this home. Okay, so this is the whole house that she's been living in since 2018, no lease. All right. And since she hasn't had a lease, there hasn't been anything, defined, stipulated throughout the lease, her do's and don'ts, things that she can do in a house, things she can't do in a house. None of that stuff was spelled out. I am going to do a separate video on some things that you can put in your lease to protect yourself, but also to protect your asset. But not only did she not have a lease, she didn't know how much to charge her for rent, right? She also does not have a team set in place so that when this young lady, something goes wrong in the house, somebody can go in and kind of take care of these things. She doesn't have any of that stuff set in place. So I want to pause right there for a moment with those three things, okay? Because there was a few other things that the young lady discussed with me that I was like shaking my head. I couldn't believe it. But the first thing I want to make sure and be very clear about, you need to have a lease. Okay. And like I said, I'll do another video where I talk about those things that you can put in your lease. And it's going to be a 2-part video because I have a lease that's easy, like 42 pages. Like this lease has a table of contents. Okay. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, that's a lot. It may be a lot, but depending on what your property is and depending on the type of resident or tenant that you have, you want to make sure that that is clearly spelled out as to what your resident can do in that home, in that office space, in that retail space, in that warehouse. You want to make sure this stuff is spelled out. Okay. But you definitely want to have a lease. That is dangerous because it is very hard to get somebody out of your space, out of your place, if they fall behind on the payments, if they don't make any payments at all. Some states or counties are more resident friendly, more tenant friendly versus landlord friendly. So that's something that you would have to find out as well. And because of that, if it's a state or county or city that is more tenant friendly, it's going to be much harder sometimes to get that person out of your apartment or your home or your warehouse or your office space or your retail space, right? So you want to make sure that you have things spelled out in its entirety. What is allowed, what's not allowed. That is very important. So number 2, another thing that you want to make sure you need to know how much you are to be charging rent. You need to know what the fair market rent is in your area and what is a reasonable amount of rent that you should be charging. Now, if you are a person who does affordable housing, if you are a person who does, Section 8 base, then that would be somewhat of a no-brainer because it's going to go based off of the income of your resident, right? But you still want to know what that base rent should be or the fair market rent should be in your area. So that way you're not overcharging anybody. Because not unfortunately, but fortunately, a lot of people are very savvy. A lot of your residents are going to be very savvy. So they're going to know what they're supposed to pay probably and what they shouldn't. Because chances are, if they're calling you about a place, they've called other places as well about a place to live. Okay. Number 3, you want to make sure you get a good team in place. You want to make sure you have your HVAC person, your contractor, and not all contractors do everything. Not all contractors are good with electrical work or plumbing work, right? So you may need a separate one. I mean, it's great if you can find a contractor that can do it all, but that's not always the case. Some contractors don't paint. And it's simply because that's not their thing. They don't like painting, and that's okay too, right? So you want to make sure you have a good team set in place. That is very, very important, especially when you're starting out as a real estate investor. You want to make sure you have a good a team of people in place so that in the event that something goes wrong, you are able to get someone out to your property to take care of that problem. Because in the dead of winter, your resident does not want to hear that you can't find somebody to come in and fix their heat because the heater went out. They don't want to hear that. And in all honesty and fairness, you wouldn't want to hear that either, right? So that is very, very important. And I'm going to go in more detail. I'm going to put 2 more videos out where I'm talking about a lease and what should be in that lease. And I'm going to break down those different things you can have in a lease. Now, sidebar to that, here's the caveat. Not everybody's lease is going to look the same, depending on the type of property it is, depending on what's going on. For example, if you have a retail space, or if you have a warehouse space, then you might have a different type of lease. Is it a double net lease? Is it a triple net lease? Is it a net lease? That's all going to be different. Something else to think about is that if you have a warehouse, you don't have anyone actually living in that warehouse, right? You more than likely it's used for other different things, but it may not be for somebody to live in. Same as your retail space. If you just have a retail space that you're renting out to a tenant, no one is probably living there unless it's mixed use and you have apartments up top and storefront down the bottom. But if it's just a storefront retail space, your lease is going to look a lot different versus somebody who has a lease for a resident who's living in one of their apartments or one of their single family homes. Okay, so that's just something to bear in mind. But some of these things still need to be in your leases. And I'm going to go over these things because I think it's very important. Now, you know, my niche is more commercial and residential. So I'm going to speak more about what those things are that you need to have in your lease as it pertains to your residents living in your apartment or your home. These are things that are very, very important. Okay. So I just wanted to get on here and talk about some of these things that as a real estate investor, a new real estate investor, you want to make sure that you are covering your tracks and covering your bases. You want to make sure you're protecting yourself. You're protecting your asset, and you're also protecting your resident, okay? I'm not going to just stop at those first 2 because protecting your resident is also very important, right? It's very critical. You should care about your residents. You should care more than just about them paying you rent. I know some investors may disagree with that, but you should at least have a heart for your people to make sure that they're taken care of at the end of the day, right? So just wanted to hop on here and talk about that because I think that is so important, right? And making sure that you are protecting your asset at all costs, okay? The reality is that we live in a very litigious world, not just a litigious state, a litigious world, okay? Everyone is always trying to go to litigation for everything. Everybody is sue happy. They want to sue for everything. I mean, years ago, there was a story about somebody who was dying and the person performed CPR on him. And in the process of performing CPR, they cracked a rib. That does happen. And it can happen when you're doing CPR, right? Well, the person lived, but then after that, because they got their rib cracked by somebody, resuscitating them, they sued the person. So this, you want to make sure that you are protecting yourself. And I know some of you might be saying, well, that's just crazy. Yeah, well, some people are just crazy like that. And some people are just looking for a payday or a handout. Not all, because I'm not going to say in every case that somebody is suing that is, it's just, you just throw caution to the wind and just say, forget about it. We don't care about that type of case, or those people are just crazy. No, what I am saying, though, is that there are some people who do not have real legitimate claims, but they will try to sue you at any cost. So you want to make sure that you are protecting your asset, you're protecting yourself, and you're protecting your resident, okay? So I'll put those videos out. Thank you so much for tuning in. Listen, if you have any questions and you want to know how you can purchase your first property or your first single family, commercial property, whatever the case may be, definitely reach out to me. Shoot me an email, yoursassyrealtor@gmail.com. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Be sure to follow. Definitely putting out more content. And I thank you so much for tuning in, because this has been like a transition period for me, going to a whole nother brokerage, because I'm unlearning stuff that I learned at another brokerage, and it's kind of different at this new brokerage in a good way, but I'm unlearning so much information and learning new information. I mean, the beautiful thing is that I'm a geek. I love to learn, but it's been a process. Okay. So thank you so much for being patient, and definitely click that like and subscribe button. All right. You guys have an amazing day. Bye-bye.